on the Democratic plan to deal with the climate crisis as it exists here in America and throughout the world. That report, of course, will be unveiled tomorrow. But it is bold, it is innovative, it is forward-looking, and it is comprehensive. And we're thankful for the work of Kathy Castor, as well as the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, for all that they have done. We also received a presentation from Chairman Frank Pallone of the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as Chairman Bobby Scott of the Education and Labor Committee, with respect to the health care legislation that will be on the floor and voted on today. And of course, later on this week, we will take up the Moving Forward Act, consistent with our promise to the American people that we would fix our crumbling and broken infrastructure and transportation system and do it in a comprehensive way. From the very beginning of the 116th Congress, we promised that we were going to fight for the people. Lower health care costs, bigger paychecks through a real infrastructure plan, and cleaning up corruption while defending our democracy. House Democrats have done all of the above, and we will continue to do so. The contrast between House Democrats, Senate Republicans, and of course the administration couldn't be any clearer. We continue to fight for the people. The Republicans continue to fight for the privileged few, even in the midst of a global pandemic. The administration's response to the COVID-19 crisis has been an unmitigated disaster. More than 125,000 Americans are dead. More than 2.5 million Americans have been infected by the coronavirus. More than 45 million Americans are unemployed. The economy is in a recession. President Trump, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, has spent more time playing golf than he has modeling good behavior, providing leadership, and wearing a mask. What more does the administration need to see before it decides to act? How much more pain, more suffering, more death does Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and the boys need to see before they decide to act? House Democrats passed the HEROES Act 45 days ago, and Senate Republicans have done nothing, zilch, nada, while the American people continue to suffer. And things aren't getting better over that period of time. They have gotten worse in state after state after state. Senate Republicans should not leave town this week and go on vacation for the 4th of July before acting on the legislation that we have sent over to them 45 days ago that would provide comprehensive relief to the American people in the context of both the public health crisis and the economic crisis that we confront. Shame on them. What more do they need to see before deciding to act? As I mentioned earlier, we'll be focusing on health care today in the context of a very busy week. And in that spirit, it's my honor to yield to the distinguished Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my good friend, Katherine Clark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and it is good to be at least here with some of you in person. The White House and Senate Republicans, as the chairman said, continue to block the HEROES Act, standing in the way of critical relief and investments for workers, state and local, territorial, and tribal governments. And as our states move closer and closer, for many of them, to a July 1st budget deadline, I know that the calls that I'm receiving from mayors and town administrators are growing in their panic about how they are going to get through this crisis without massive layoffs of teachers and librarians and other municipal employees. In contrast to the inaction by the Senate, this week House Democrats will vote on the Patient, Protect, and Enhancement Act, which is designed to expand the ACA, shore up Medicaid, and lower prescription drug prices. Further, our infrastructure legislation is a $1.5 trillion proposal to rebuild and reimagine the nation's transportation infrastructure, schools, child care facilities, affordable housing, and take significant steps to promote new renewable energy and green development. We are presenting tangible steps to support, strengthen, and rebuild our country. These bills, along with the provisions outlined in the HEROES Act, testing, tracing, and treatment, are our path forward. Donald Trump, however, is outright disregarding the pandemic, tweeting, holding dangerous rallies, and politicizing the most basic solutions, like wearing a mask. He's admitted to slowing down testing and cutting COVID-19 sites. It's been 123 days since Donald Trump said we would soon have 0 cases in the United States. And now we make up 1/4 of all cases in the world. There is no plan from the White House. There is no concern or care for the families, frontline workers, or business owners who are suffering tremendous loss. It's a White House defined by regression, proving with every challenge that there's no interest in leading us forward or building on America's strength, only providing further division and devastation. Democrats stand ready to bring stability, safety, and leadership back to America. And this week on the floor, we will do just that.
Now take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to ask about the George Floyd, the policing reform bill. There's some disagreement just talking to members, to your colleagues in the caucus, and it sounds like some want to go to conference, some want a four corners negotiation. Some, Mr. Clyburn last week said it would be better to have Senate Democrats and Republicans work out a deal and just skip the conference altogether. I'm just wondering what you see as a path forward. What's the best way to get this thing to the president?
Well, we have a national problem in terms of police violence, police abuse, and police brutality. It requires a national solution that doesn't simply incentivize this jurisdiction over here or that jurisdiction over there, while others may decide to opt out of the legislative incentives that are put in the Senator Scott bill. So from my perspective, the best way forward is for the Senate Democrats and Republicans to come together and discuss the common ground that can be found working off of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. That legislation is the most comprehensive, the most thorough, and the most transformative bill ever to have been passed by either house of Congress, and it was done in a bipartisan way. So the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is the only bipartisan game in town right now. And that should be the vehicle by which we find an agreement to be able to do something meaningful on police reform.
On police reform, violence and shootings have increased in New York the past few days, same with other cities around the country. Is there a dangerous backlash to perhaps police reform? How do you deal with that delicate balance?
Well, it's my expectation that year over year, you will see that the violence numbers will not significantly change in one direction or the other as it relates to New York City. often, whenever we have put forward police reform efforts, the automatic response for the forces of the status quo is to say, we are going to unleash a crime wave on the American people. We went down this road before in New York City when we were told that the out-of-control stop and frisk program, if it were to be reformed, would take us back to the bad old days in New York City. Now, at the height of stop and frisk, there were 685,000 people who were stopped, questioned, and frisked by the New York City Police Department. The overwhelming majority of whom were Black and Latino, and the overwhelming majority of whom had done nothing wrong, according to the New York Police Department's own statistics. We were told, however, after we objected to the explosion of stop and frisk encounters, that if we were to change our ways and police the community in a more respectful fashion, crime is going to skyrocket. Well, after stop and frisk was declared unconstitutional by the federal courts, and stop and frisk encounters are now less than 50,000 in New York City from a high of 685,000, crime didn't go up over what has now been a 5+ year period of time. It's gone down. So when you police the community in a more respectful fashion and increase cooperation, you actually improve the ability to combat crime in neighborhoods of color and in a relevant jurisdiction. And so my expectation would be the same exact thing will occur if we're successful with our legislative efforts. Catherine.
I'd just like to add that just a few days ago on the floor of the House, we debated and passed a bill making the Pulse nightclub a national memorial. And we have had two common sense proposals for curbing gun violence, universal background checks, and closing the Charleston loophole sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for over a year. We can do these things at the same time. We can address the public health crisis of the pandemic. We can address the public health crisis of racial injustice in this country. We can address the public health crisis of climate change. And we can address the public health crisis of gun violence. Now is a great time to take this on in the Senate because we know that gun violence is often the lethal partner, as we saw in Pulse, to racism and bigotry, and it is time for our country to do better and provide true security for the American people.
Two-part question. The first one is on the prescription drugs. We had an announcement from Gilead today. They're going to charge $3,000 for this COVID treatment. Do you feel like there's any momentum to put a prescription drug provision in a stimulus bill that comes out later this summer? And then also, another company in the news, Facebook, is really under fire for the way it's handling Donald Trump's posts. Do you see a role for Congress in especially investigating or regulating that issue?
Led by Speaker Pelosi, our response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been to make sure that testing, tracing, treatment, and eventually a vaccine is available to the American people, regardless of race, regardless of income, regardless of zip code. To the extent that there are additional steps that need to be taken in order to rein in out-of-control behavior by drug companies who in the midst of a pandemic may fleece the American people, that is certainly something that I think should be discussed and executed upon in the context of legislation moving forward. With respect to the second part, Facebook, the second part of the question, Chairman David Cicilline, as well as Chairman Jerry Nadler of the Judiciary Committee and the Antitrust Subcommittee are in the midst of an ongoing investigation right now into irresponsible behavior by some of our social media giants. And I think you can certainly include some of the behavior that we've seen from Facebook as prominent in that inquiry. And until it reaches a conclusion, I don't want to get out ahead of the Judiciary Committee. Catherine?
Okay. Chairman Engel seems to have lost his primary. What is your reaction to that? Why do you think that is?
Well, let's see what happens when all the votes are counted, but it certainly appears as though it'll be a difficult margin for Chairman Engel to make up. But until he concedes, and until the Board of Elections formally declares Jamal Bowman the victor, I'm going to refrain from making any observations about the campaign, other than to say that Jamal ran a great campaign from beginning to end, and if in fact it turns out that he prevailed, I think we all within the New York delegation look forward to working with him.
Get one more if I could. You mentioned masks, and there seems to be an increasing emphasis on the importance of wearing masks. You saw Mike Pence come out and make that suggestion over the weekend. Is there any, and yet they're still not mandatory here on the floor, even in this room they're not mandatory. Is there any talk of making them mandatory in the Capitol? And if so, how would you enforce that? Because there are some on the other side of the aisle who are still reluctant to do so.
Well, to the extent that the Capitol is both under the jurisdiction of the House and the Senate, I think there'd have to be some conversations between the Speaker, who has led on this issue, and Mitch McConnell, who it's unclear what their approach would be because they continue to act like wholly owned subsidiaries of the Trump administration on issue after issue after issue, even if it jeopardizes their own health. But it's fair to say that I strongly support the Speaker's decision with respect to masks in the context of committee proceedings, and Chairman Nadler's decision as it relates to not recognizing members who refuse, in defiance of the public health recommendations of Donald Trump's own Centers for Disease Control, to wear masks as a means of dealing with the pandemic. With respect to any broader discussion that would require a change in House rules, that's not something that has been discussed yet, at least in the context of the caucus.
Question on these 4 months away from the election. How closely are you guys coordinating with the Biden campaign on policy at this point? Are you going to have some kind of joint platform that you're going to be able to roll out, or what's the process there?
Well, different members have been involved in different ways. I'll yield to Catherine as well on this. But my communications with the Biden campaign are sometimes direct and sometimes through Cedric Richmond, who, of course, is a national co-chair, someone who we all respect here within the House Democratic Caucus, and is one of the leading voices at the table in shaping the policy initiatives of the Biden campaign. I certainly have a lot of confidence in the campaign because I have great confidence in Cedric Richmond.
Have either of you guys been invited to a briefing today at the White House on the Russia bounty situation? If not, do you know anyone in your caucus who has been, and if that briefing is actually happening?
I have not been invited to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm not sure who may have been invited, but I think Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer did request today an all of Congress briefing from the administration at the highest level to get an understanding of what has happened, why there was no inaction, and what is being done to help deal with the fact that we have U.S. troops clearly in harm's way over in Afghanistan, potentially targeted by Russia, which is further evidence of the fact that Russia is not a friend, they are a foe, despite what Donald Trump may think.
I have not been invited to the White House either, but I do want to say that this is yet again a disturbing pattern with this president. of not questioning Putin, putting something out, whether it's a tweet with a man screaming white power and then saying, I didn't happen to hear that, or this latest intelligence that, as reported by numerous news outlets now, saying that there could have been a bounty on American troops. The president is saying that he did not know of this. But where is the outrage from him that he didn't know about this? Where is his questioning and demands for information if we take this at face value? It is another example of this unusual hold that Putin has on this president. And it is another example that we have seen time and time again in this pandemic of the president putting his relationships first, himself first, what he wants, his election, over the security of the American people. It was why he was impeached, and this is a very disturbing allegation to have arisen again.
One last question.
I'll ask one. Speaker Pelosi has made clear that the Democrats' response to the George Floyd killing would be multifaceted. It would be police reform, but it would also be, economic. It would be healthcare. It would be rural broadband, things like that. And you are moving on a number of those things. About a year ago, there was also a big push to explore reparations. And I'm wondering if that is going to come back around as one of the responses to this. There has been a hearing on it last year, but Chairman Nadler never took it up in the committee. Leader Hoyer said if it passed the committee, he would bring a vote on the floor, but we haven't seen any movement since last year.
The Congressional Black Caucus has a meeting scheduled for this Wednesday where we will discuss a variety of the different legislative initiatives that we think are important for Congress to take up as we move forward and address the systemic racism and inequality that has existed in America for the last 401 years. Sheila Jackson Lee, of course, has been a great advocate of the Reparations Commission study, and I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation. Chairman Nadler says he supports it, and so we'll see what decisions are made by the Congressional Black Caucus as well as the Judiciary Committee. It's my expectation that we won't see Chairman Nadler or the Judiciary Committee move on anything within his jurisdiction until the Congressional Black Caucus has weighed in about what our moving forward agenda will be in the context of systemic racism in America. Thank you, everyone.